right, so we have our first guest on the podcast. Her name is Colleen Furlotte, and she has been busy with some different film projects, such as Petal and Moth, which I had the privilege of being an extra in, and one of my best friends was the main actor. And her most recent one was Tent City, which is a documentary. So, Colleen, welcome to the show. And first, I'd like to ask you a bit about yourself, so that everybody can get to know you.
Yeah.
So, how long have you been into filmmaking, and like when did it start? And
Filmmaking for me started very unexpectedly in 2009. I guess the concept for a film started 2 years prior, but I actually first dipped my toes in the water of the film world in 2009 with a documentary project called A Question of Beauty. And so that was my first project. So I guess it's been 10 years.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you said the first one was A Question of Beauty? Or was that
that was the very first one that I did.
And then after that, you had the experimental one that...
Yep, it was an experimental drama called Stripped.
So what made you want to dive into the film field?
It wasn't a premeditated thing. I literally I was out walking one night on the trail in Riverview, and a film just literally started playing in front of my eyes, kind of metaphorically speaking, I guess. Yeah. So the name, the content, certain scenes, certain specific discussions. I saw particular images that ended up being in the film. So, and it was just a really, there was a really big push. I've had, you're a creative person, so you know what it's like to have, kind of little seeds of ideas, but there are lots of them that don't really take root. But each of the film projects that I've done, they came with a real force that I wasn't able to ignore. So it was sort of like, I sort of say, it sounds a bit funny to say it this way, but I feel like I didn't decide to make a film. It's like a film decided that I was going to make it. That's how it felt each time. So I wasn't able to relax and rest until I saw it through. So that's what happened with those particular projects. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I can totally relate. It's like same for me as a musician. Sometimes I'll just be driving down the road and see like a sign, and all of a sudden I'll get a melody in my head and some lyrics, and I'll go sit on the piano and start writing it, and it's like I'm just a facilitator for the song that already existed to begin with.
Exactly, you're like a conduit.
It's a kind of a double-edged sword there, kind of give and exchange. So that's amazing. So what has filmmaking done for you in your life? What do you find it has done for you as a person, emotionally, intellectually, socially, in every aspect? What has filmmaking itself provided for you?
I guess I'll tell you what I think. Just the first thing that came to mind, because when I think of the first film, it really the first film introduced me to a world that I wasn't connected to at all, which was the world of visual art. And I also made a lot of really close connections. People who are really important in my life now came from that film. And visual art has become something, as you know, because you've been to my house, you've seen that I have a bit of a fondness for a lot
of amazing pieces there.
Yeah. So that changed my life. And I think it just deepened my appreciation for the creative world. And one of the good friends that I met doing A Question of Beauty, who is a visual artist who unfortunately just passed away earlier this year, her husband is a poet, a writer, who's a very dear friend of mine. And so it also brought me closer to the writing world, which is something else that I have an interest in. So I think maybe my connection to the film world might be different from some other people who are connected to the film world, because I guess I'd sort of see it as just another form of artistic expression. I guess for me, what I find interesting about it is that it combines all my different areas of interest. And in each of my projects, there's been an element of music, and there's been an element of visual art. And I'm kind of I guess I tend to be a little self-indulgent in that way. All the things that I love become part of the story that I'm trying to tell in one way or another. I guess maybe Tent City, not so much, because Tent City was specifically about Tent City. So that one's a little bit different. Yeah. But the three features, even though one was a documentary, one is an experimental drama, and it was very experimental. And Petal and Moth is a fictional drama. They still all had those elements of art and music, and I would like to think strong writing, some kind of poetic moments, elements. Yeah, so I
awesome.
guess that's what it's done for me. It's stretched me as a creative person, and it's brought me into contact with other creative people who've become dear friends and mentors and supporters of the work that I do. So yeah, it's just been really, I guess that's the biggest gift that it's given me.
Yeah, it sounds like it's given you a lot. I know one thing for me, I was actually into filmmaking throughout high school. I was really into screenwriting and video editing, and also, of course, I loved every aspect, even like the camera work itself. And I always saw it as an art form as well. And one of the most fascinating things for me about film is that it includes every type of art form, so music, dance, storytelling, you name it. And humans we love stories of the ups and downs of things. And one of the things you learn when you are going through screenwriting, you really learn how to bring people through an emotional roller coaster, and you learn about the different types. Like there's one where like you start off with like a big climax and then it dies down, and then there's another little climax towards the end, and then there's one where it kind of starts off dull and has like waves of emotions. And so taking through these different people through these different waves of excitement and emotions. And I think it literally is just like life itself when we go through all these ups and downs. And I think humans we're naturally drawn to connection, and movies really help us see things from different perspectives. Like
and I think we like that because film gives us an opportunity to have an experience, to experience something in that 1.5 hours or 2 hours that you're lost in this world. You're having, it's like you're living that experience temporarily, whether it's an experience that you haven't had and it's interesting to you because you're living it through the film, or it's an experience that you have had and you maybe have comfort. If it was a difficult experience, it's comforting to know that you're not alone in it, or that you're sort of understood. There's a huge it's very escapist. The thing about film, I think that makes it a powerful medium, is that you have the strength of the auditory experience, but also the visual experience. So it really takes all, those two main senses that we experience the world through, and it just dunks you right in there. So it's we can go quite deep if you can surrender to the experience. You really are living, that's why people cry when they watch films, or you feel so scared if it's a horror film. Like you're having a reaction as if what's happening in the film is actually happening to you. So I think, it comes back to
emotional connection.
Yeah, and just the human experience, right? Yeah. And
it's interesting too when you talk about how like the emotional connection of movies, where it's like you're living it. You can say vicariously. You can also look at quantum physics and how everything that we see around us is through our observation, and it's our thoughts and perception that they say that kind of create the reality around us, because nothing can exist outside of an observer. And so it's almost like when you do watch a movie, it's like you literally kind of are in that scenario, living that exact moment, because at that moment your brain and your senses are connected to that. So it's almost like as if you actually are living that. And I think that's part of what really connects people. And of course, you aren't actually, but I mean, you are in a really deep sense. But so
you have those emotional responses as if you were experiencing it. If it's a horror film, you have fear as if something is about to happen to you. If it's something very heartbreaking, you can be moved to tears. If it's something really funny, you're laughing.
Exactly.
So it's
because in your own mind, you're thinking of what it would be like to live there, and therefore you sort of actually are in your own mind.
Yes, I think you're just film can pull you in that way. And if you look at the traditional way of experiencing film, which is in a dark room with a big screen, and that kind of adds to that, that feeling of escape.
Yeah,
I think that there's magic in that way of watching films, as opposed to watching on a computer screen, or which I do as well, but I don't find the experience is the same. Yeah. I don't find that you go quite as deep.
So like taking you back to the old theater days, which has a big part in history because we started off watching movies in these little tiny theaters. There's a museum in Winnipeg called the Museum of Man and Nature, and they have this recreated old theater, and it's awesome. You go in there, you press a button, and here comes on this Charlie Chaplin movie, silent film, and you just like literally sit there as if you're in the 40s watching, or no, it was before then. It was like the 1910s, 1920s.
I'm not going to take a chance and say the wrong date, so we'll just say a while ago.
But yeah, the film has had a big impact on society for a really long time, and everybody's always felt connected with it, and which also I feel like we should probably talk about Charlie Chaplin a little bit because
sure.
I know that story that you were telling me.
Yes, isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, Colleen has had the pleasure of befriending one of Charlie Chaplin's close friends.
Yes.
And there's some very interesting stories to go along with that, including one that really connects with me, which is when
the one with the note?
The one before he was... before Charlie Chaplin went anywhere, and basically Charlie Chaplin. Do you want to tell the story? You could probably.
Yeah, I can't. So this is an experience. I had a friend named Charles Foster who passed away a few years ago, who was one of the leading experts in early Hollywood, and he was a close friend of Charlie Chaplin. And they were both from England, and when they were both in England at one point, Charlie shared a secret with him. He took him downstairs. It was some kind of I don't know if it was a pub or a restaurant or a bar or something. Anyway, he took him downstairs, and there was some kind of like a tunnel for storage or something, and he pulled a stone or a brick from the wall, and there was a little piece of paper shoved in the back. And whatever Charlie Chaplin's actual name is, I can't remember what it is because Charlie Chaplin is a stage name. It said, "My name is whatever, John Doe. One day I will be the most famous comedian in the world." And he said to Charlie that after he passed away, he wanted Charlie to come and get this note, which was hidden in behind this stone in this tunnel beneath this restaurant/pub. And sadly, it caved in. So it's still buried in there. That note is still buried.
Yeah, that story fascinates me, and it reminds me of the classic story with Jim Carrey, who wrote a check for himself for I think like $10 million for acting services rendered. And he would, I guess, look at it all the time and I guess dream and visualize it actually happening. And until it finally did one day, and he received a check for maybe it was 10 million or maybe a little more for his first movie. But it's inspiring because a lot of people do have visions, and it's almost like it makes you question that the whole idea or concept of destiny. Some people think that things are already laid out for them, and others, I guess like myself, is I think you create your own destiny, and if you really have the desire, you can make things happen. It seems like that's what Jim Carrey
and Charlie Chaplin worked very hard to get where he was, for sure. Exactly,
yeah. And I think they both had a big impact on the world too, and part of it I think is the big belief that they had within themselves. It's interesting how those people had a major impact, and they're both comedians, so laughter can really kind of connect with people.
Again, it's that thing of just like a shared human experience, right? Yeah. Where we connect with others through that. And I think there's something, comedy, it's making me think of the origins of film too, which was that it's a form of entertainment, it's a form of escapism. And it's interesting because in times of duress, of social conflict or economic crisis, like during the Depression, people didn't have much money, but they were still going to see movies. They would scrape together money to see movies because they needed that escape to help them cope. And comedy does that as well. So there's probably, when you marry those two, comedy and film, it's probably not surprising that it's kind of like a double punch, where you just get this real relief from just for a while, because as you said, life has its ups and downs. So we need that. Entertainment is important, that like good escape. There's some ways we can escape that's not so good for us, but that's like a nice safe thing to just lose yourself in a film for a few hours. It doesn't affect your physical health or your mental health or
exactly
in a negative way.
I agree. Film's very comforting, and you could say that I think it'd be mutually agreed upon that film and entertainment in general has really helped humanity cope through some very challenging times. Because when we go through mass turbulence as a collective society, or even in just your family life, what is it that helps people cope? And that is entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do the same thing with music or a good book. It's just we need those little breaks from our own lives sometimes, you know?
Exactly. Good little
and it's
healthy
not
breaks.
And sometimes it's not always to have a break because your life is difficult. Sometimes it's just you go on a little trip, you know, a trip into somebody else's world. Again, it's that thing of you live through these other people who sometimes aren't even real. They're fictional people, but it's interesting for us to kind of be transported into that little world.
Yeah,
for a while.
For myself, I don't really consider it an escape. I consider it more of an exploration, and because for me, I use entertainment as a way to gain something new. And that could be new emotions, new experiences, new lessons or teachings, or new perspectives or insight. And for me as a musician, one of the things that I've noticed is I've always had a very eclectic taste in music. And you look at my playlist and it's like I have one song from multiple different artists, and I couldn't even tell you their names, but I just love all types of music. But I found that just opening myself up to all these different sounds has really helped me kind of create new sounds out of those ones, because you just have this kind of database
for sure
of universal sounds, and you can kind of create from there. And you can say the same with film. I mean, that's how things evolve, right? You take what was there and then you kind of expand on it. So
yeah, well, all of the very accomplished creative people that I know personally expose themselves to a lot of material to enhance the work that they do. So for example, Romeo Savoy, who's a 91-year-old, very well accomplished and well recognized contemporary artist from our area. He's constantly looking at art magazines and books and looking at art, and he's done this throughout his entire career, and really emphasizes that when he talks to me, you know, because he gives me some good a talking to every now and again. So does Nancy Schofield, another friend of mine, another accomplished visual artist, who does the same thing, constantly looking at things to kind of fill them up and broaden their, because it's I think anytime we're creating something, we're pulling little pieces from different parts of our what's in us, what's in our mind, what's in our, you know, stored away in files. Like it's things that we've seen, it's things we've experienced, we put them into something new. We create like a new recipe with them, but those ingredients have to come from somewhere. They don't just fall out from the ether. It's things that we've been exposed to, sometimes passively, sometimes we're not even necessarily aware that it's going in there. Sometimes we're very aware that it's going in there. But yeah,
well, absolutely. I mean, 95% of our life is run by our subconscious, so things that we don't even notice are going to influence our artwork and creativity in any sort of way, even things from like designing a business. Yeah,
well, so I think it's conscious and unconscious elements that go in there, and then you kind of like mix them in some new way and create. Yeah, one interesting thing to kind of relate with that, especially the thing that you said about at the beginning, about how the kind of you were just, the movie was already there and you were just the facilitator and the creator of it. That can be said with like many things really, but an example could be the invention of like the telephone or different inventions where people around the world have had the same idea and they all came out around the same time and these different places, and it's like, how could that happen? And it's like it was already in the air, in the universe or the realm of thought, whatever you want to call it, and somebody had to create it. It was a matter of who was going to do it. And I guess that can be used for many different creations like that. Yeah.
It's a very interesting kind of subject to shed some light on.
Yeah, I think the creative process is very interesting and mysterious at the same time, and every creative person has their own way of going about it. I know some creative people who are very disciplined and very a good friend of mine, Ed Lamond, who's a poet, has done a number of projects, but the craziest one was for an entire year, 365 days, he wrote a poem. And it was very it was dictated to him in a certain way, because he would always pull a book from his book collection and at random, and then he had a certain page number and a certain line, fifth line, page 68, let's say. That was what he had to follow, and whatever that line was, that was the jumping off point for the poem. I don't know how much you know about poetry, but it's not easy to write. And his poem also had a certain rhyming scheme and a certain structure, and he had to do this every day for an entire year. So this was a very self-imposed, which really, it was hard. Near the end, it was oh my gosh, he said he didn't know how he was going to get to the end of it, but it really stretched him as an artist. So very disciplined. Me, on the other hand, when I want to do something creative, it seems if I try to be disciplined, it runs from me. The harder I look for it, the more it's taking off or hiding. The big ideas come to me when I stop looking, and I can't seem to learn that lesson because I do the same thing every time. Because when I finish a big project, I'm sort of in a panic because I want to have another project, and so I'm like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? It never comes to me. It's only when I stop looking, then it will just all of a sudden appear. And to make a film, you need a lot of motivation, because it's huge. It's so labor intensive. And because I make films with essentially no money, very little money, sometimes no money at all, it means I have to do everything that I can. As you know, in Petal and Moth, I'm the lead actress, the director, the writer, the editor. It's not a thing of being self-indulgent. It's the film wouldn't have happened if I hadn't done all that. That's how the film happened. I don't even remember what my original point was, but anyway, that's
that was a lot. That was good. That was good stuff you just said.
I was talking about if I go looking for things, they run away from me. Yeah. So luckily for me, when these big ideas come, they come with that big force. Otherwise, I don't know if I could muster up the motivation to do those projects.
It's amazing how these creative things can come to us, because it can be just like you said, when you're walking, or for me when I'm driving, or sometimes when I'm just pressing random buttons on my keyboard or guitar, I'll come up with a cool riff or idea, or even just a sentence I say. It makes me think of a song. And it's interesting you say how he did that, where he added those restrictions as a creative project, because in a sense, adding restrictions, or whatever you want to call them, by picking a line and sticking to a certain scheme, it really almost makes you more creative in a way, because then you have to, how do I be creative with this little bit of mud that I have to mold? What am I going to mold this clay? Something
that is true. Yeah. That I believe it's been studied scientifically, that when you put restriction, because it forces you to have to come up with something. So it's actually really good for creativity. It's just I don't seem to I seem to push against that sort of thing a little bit.
I think for me and my band, it kind of happens a little bit both ways. Sometimes it just flows through, and other times you got to create a restriction and think a little bit.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the fun of it. I mean, that's what creativity is. The possibilities are endless. You never know how it's going to be, and it can be come from however you want it to.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know who's going to be listening to this podcast right now, but if there's anybody listening that is someone who has wanted to be creative in some way, but has felt intimidated, or is afraid of failing, or, to me, the only failure is not, if you fail at something, it's actually not a failure, because you can only fail at something when you are actually doing something, and there's no failure in trying something. So do you understand what I'm saying? It's a weird kind of a paradox, that failure to me is a sign of not failing, because it means you're actually doing something. So just don't be scared. There's no way to screw up creativity. Like, creativity is creativity. You do it, and it will get better and better. If you're just starting out, it all, the more you do it, the more it gets better. But there's no failure in being a novice creator, because none of us are like amazing out of the gate. It takes a while to hone your craft, but it's just, when kids are doing things, they're not afraid of how it looks or how it's going to be perceived. They're just in the moment, and they're doing it because it's joyful. And creativity has that, creativity gives us that. So if there's anybody listening who has had, some little secret desire to be a writer, to be a painter, or to make film or whatever, like just go out
or to do more of it.
Yeah, just try it. Just do it. Like, don't be afraid of failing, because failure is to me a badge of honor. It means that you actually went out and tried something.
And also, I think for me, from my perspective, the only failure is just not doing anything.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So I don't actually see failure the way other people see it,
Yeah, no, exactly. And I can kind of talk about, I consider myself a pretty good songwriter now, and I write a lot of songs, and but it's not something you're born with. I mean, to me, maybe it is in a sense, but I think talent is a combination of passion and practice. And I started singing. I sucked at singing. Like, I sounded like Kermit the Frog. No, maybe not that good. No,
don't want to insult Kermit.
Yeah, don't want to insult Kermit. He's a pretty cool guy. But no, seriously, like, I wasn't that good. And even, of course, any musician who starts off playing an instrument, you're not good. But your passion and your desire to play and want to be good is actually what makes you good.
Yeah.
So over time, I became a good singer and a good musician, a good piano player, a good keyboard player. And now I'm even starting to get better at drums, and it's all that desire. So that's why it's important to follow your passion. And even if you're not good at your passion now, if you keep doing it, you'll be really good at it.
And just don't be afraid of jumping in. Like, just jump. Just do it. Don't be afraid of screwing up, because we all screw up, and that's how you get better. You screw up, and then you go, okay, I'm not going to do that again, and then you improve.
Exactly.
That's just life.
There's a Japanese word called kaizen, which it means continually improving, like basically every aspect in your life. So if you're continually improving, then, or continually hold that mindset of continually improving, that's when you'll achieve success. So when it comes to like me for songwriting, I've written hundreds and hundreds of songs, but people only hear a few of them. You know what I mean? So, and then those were all just practice to me, and they're all just expression.
But they're all valid, whether they're heard or not. They're still valid because they've been created. Yeah. There's value in that. For
the love of doing them.
Yeah.
And even the old movies I used to make put them on YouTube, I ended up deleting them on my YouTube channel, and then it's kind of funny. Couple days or a couple weeks after I deleted them, I had some old friends ask me, "Where did they go?" Like, I was trying to find them online, and I'm like, well, honestly, just wanted to delete them because for me it was like letting go of the past and make room for the new. But to me, they were just practice, and ready for new and greater things. And it's okay that maybe they didn't succeed in the past or whatever. And
I guess I just see strong value in the process of creating. So there are lots of films that I see that I don't like, but I always have to give credit to the person for making them. I may not like what they've made. It may not appeal to me aesthetically, or I may not like the story or whatever, but I still give credit to them for making it. They did that, and that's valuable. Exactly. Doesn't mean just because it's impossible that everyone is going to like every a song. You write a song, it's impossible that everyone is going to like that song. I make a film, it's impossible that we're so different. So you please yourself, you take the chance, you make it, and then you hope that it resonates with some people, and that's the best that you can do.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So to me, it's not a failure if you do something and someone doesn't like it. That's not a failure. It just means, okay, well, you made this thing and it didn't resonate with this person, but that's not a failure.
But you know what? If it comes from the heart, it's going to resonate with somebody. There's an audience for your content.
Yeah, it's going to resonate with someone. That's the thing.
Yeah, there's an audience. There's always an audience for your content. So if you want to create something, just create it. And even if somebody's already doing a similar thing, there's like over 7 billion people in the world. It's hard to be original now.
Yeah, well, everybody's
you can be original but original in the sense,
but
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Original in the sense where like it can be like, I don't know, a makeup artist, for example. So somebody might be a makeup artist and they might want to make YouTube videos and showing off their skills, but they have these limiting beliefs that they can't make a YouTube channel because somebody else is doing it and they're really successful and they already have lots of views and followers, and maybe they're not going to be as successful. Maybe it's not worth it. Maybe there's already enough of them. But when in reality, that's only that person's expression. So if the other person truly expresses themselves, then there's going to be a market for what they have to offer, because what they're going to do, even though it's similar, it's going to be a lot different than the other person.
Yeah, it'll speak to different people.
Yeah.
I think it's so we in so many ways we can think ourselves out of doing something. We can think ourselves out of following through with something that we really want to do by having, again, it comes back to this fear of failure. But if you can look at failure as, it's not, like I said, to me failure is a badge of honor because it means that you tried something. Mm-hmm. And that takes courage. It takes courage to put yourself out there. Yeah. It's like the Man in the Arena speech by Theodore Roosevelt that I believe I shared with you before.
Yeah, you did. That's a beautiful speech.
It's like the credit goes to the man in the arena who's, marred and bloodied, and because he's in there, and even if you stumble and you fail, you're stumbling and you're failing. Or sorry, stumbling and falling. Even if you stumble, you fall, you're doing it valiantly because you're trying. So to me, there's you can't fail. That's how I see it. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's why I'm not afraid to do these big crazy projects, because what other people would see as failure, if I based it on that, well, I guess I could feel like I was a failure. If I say my project is only a success if I get into this particular film festival, then I don't get into the film festival, then I've done a year of work and I'm going to feel like I'm a failure. But that's ridiculous.
Exactly. Yeah.
I wouldn't even want to make a film if that's what I was basing it on.
Yeah, and it's all about falling in love with the journey and the process, because I can relate for even playing music, like shows and festivals. I mean, we spend all these hours learning our instruments, then writing songs as a band and practicing them, practicing our sets, and then it's all fun. It's all a fun process, but like the kind of biggest reward of it is finally performing your music for people, or maybe for you it's for an audience finally viewing your completed product. And once that's done, it's like, what next? Well, that was it. And it's just like the whole journey was the journey itself was the whole entire package. It was the last year that your whole life spent in building that was the moment and beyond. So yeah, because if we fixate on one moment, then we'll never be satisfied. And it's a lot, like, I agree with what you're saying, like kind of with in regards to failure, kind of along this, in a similar sense, it would be to just enjoy the journey. And I mean, succeeding on its own. I'm speaking about this as a person who used to have those fears, who used to be very afraid of failure. Oh, when I was in school, if I don't get this particular mark, or if I do this thing and it's not recognized, but if this person doesn't think it's good, somewhere along the line, maybe it just comes with being on the earth long enough and getting older, that just changed for me. And I've had people say like, oh, I admire you because you're so courageous, but I have to admit, I don't feel courageous when I do these projects. I really just feel like I'm not really, to me, you have to be afraid to be courageous, but I don't go into these afraid. I just go into them like foolishly determined that I'm going to do this thing. So yeah, I guess like I said earlier, if there's one key thing that I would like people listening to take from this is to try to not let fear dictate what you do, because fear of failure. Because to me, that, like I said, I know I've said this already 2 or 3 times. Sorry, but I just think it's so important that the only way you can fail is if you've actually taken the chance to try, and that is not. There's no failure in that to me. So exactly, I agree. Thanks for saying that. Yeah, that's awesome. So, what do you think that cinema has provided for society in the past and in the present, and what do you think it could do for us in the future? Do you see it changing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think historically it was a form of entertainment. It's a form of storytelling. It's a form of escapism. A documentary film is a form of, educating or, spreading information. I think there are also some alarming trends in film. The amount of violence to me is really quite horrifying. I don't know if you're familiar with the film Blue is the Warmest Color. It's a film that won the Palme d'Or at Cannes a number of years ago. And it was very controversial because there's an 8-minute sex scene, a lesbian sex scene, this 8-minute lesbian sex scene. So it was hugely controversial. And in the States, I think there were like some theaters that were going to ban it. And they were interviewing one of the lead actresses, and she was saying, I guess they have a slightly different perspective, I guess, in Europe. But she said, I don't understand why people are so up in arms about this. To me, this is like, sexuality is very natural. What's not natural to me is the degree of violence that I see in films coming out of the States. So it's hard for me to answer this question without thinking about that, because I think that cinema offers some really wonderful things, but I think we have to be careful, because I think it's a slippery slope when you start getting into films that the whole point of the film is just violence. And because to me that's not much different from many years ago when they used to throw people into a pit with lions. I don't think that's a good thing for us, because I know I said earlier,
at least now it's fake lions.
Yeah, as I said earlier, when you watch a film, like, it's not going to hurt you mentally or physically, but I guess psychologically, if you're exposed to too much of that sort of thing, it probably could do some harm.
And certainly, I think you're right. It does have an impact on your TV and film, and even media, reality TV, and the news. It certainly has a big impact on somebody's psyche.
Yeah. And
it's like any tool; it can be used for good or bad, and it can be misused, or it can be used too much or too little. So I think that, and like we talked about earlier, you can become so invested in the emotions and become part of the experience of a movie that it starts to impact your neurological functioning in your brain, because you're going to start to have these new patterns of thought that you might not have had before.
Yeah, I guess I'm concerned with desensitization to violence,
which is a real scientific thing. It's an actual problem that can happen with TV and video games when it's misused.
Yeah.
But I think with a powerful tool like that, you can also use it powerfully for good too, and to make a positive impact on society. I think these days, just simply because we've had so much chaos and destruction, whether it's through the food industry or the environmental destruction or political or religious or any other type of thing that I might have missed, you're seeing more and more documentaries and TV series focusing on shedding light on these situations and offering solutions that we didn't have 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And now we finally are starting to spread more awareness through that. Like Tent City. A lot of people didn't even know Tent City existed until you made that documentary.
Yeah, and I think documentaries are interesting in that way because there is a bit of escapism when you're watching a documentary, because it's still a film and you're still being pulled into that world. But I think the purpose of it is more to educate, inform, expose something.
For me, I find documentaries very fulfilling because I like to learn, and
yeah, me too. I love documentaries.
And also, you kind of put yourself in the experience. You get the emotional kind of aspect of it too. But yeah, for me, this is the whole reason for me creating this podcast. This is a form of media, and it's just to connect with a broader range of audience. And I know lots of other people have podcasts, but I'm just expressing it in my own way. And
well, I think it's interesting too. We're talking about cinema, but I love that podcasts are gaining traction the way they are, because as much as I like film, I also am a huge fan of just having an auditory experience of something. And I actually sometimes find that watching film it's sometimes a little overwhelming to me to have to deal with the visual and the auditory. I don't know if that has something to do with the fact that I've got a background in music as well.
Yeah, it does demand your attention.
Yeah, I feel, because in the experimental drama that I did, that one of the things I did is and it drove people crazy, the people who saw it. I apologize to all of you people who had to sit through it, because it was a sort of a study in darkness and light, metaphorically and literally. So darkness as in, when we go through difficult things. Mm-hmm. But the film, as you were watching it, you were being plunged into darkness in the theater. I was stripping the film of picture. And for me, those scenes are way more intense than the scenes that have visual with audio. I find the scenes where the visual is gone and you're just listening, those affected me much more on a much deeper level. And I had some people say there were a couple of parts in the film where it was just, they were just listening to something and they said it was actually making them feel like a bit nauseous. It was so intense. Yeah. So it's interesting to me because, there's a whole history of like people gathering around the radio to listen to like stories, way back before television, or when maybe people couldn't all afford a television set. Yeah. And there's starting to be a trend now to audio fiction podcasts, this sort of thing where you're just listening and you don't have to look at something. You're just listening. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And for your film, when you were talking about the darkness scene, when you can only hear the audio, it's like you have to piece together the images with your own imagination, and our imaginations can be pretty wild, right? So that can really have a powerful impact on people. I think
that it's like when you read a book, which is probably why for a lot of people when they see a film, it falls short if they've read a book first. Because I think I don't feel that, this is just my personal opinion, I think that what you create in your mind is probably infinitely more interesting than what anyone can create on screen. Because our mind is it's so limitless.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And what you're going to create in your mind, you bring all your own stuff to that image. So it's impossible for a filmmaker to match that because what they're putting on screen is what's in their mind.
Exactly.
So I think it's interesting when you're listening to something, especially if it's like an audio fiction or reading a book, and you're just lost in this. It's like there's a giant movie screen in your head. And I think that's phenomenal. And I think it's also good for us. I think it's good for us to have to engage that way and not always have a completely passive experience, because your brain has to work a little bit harder if you're not handed everything.
I agree. Yeah. And
I think it's good to have a bit of both.
I'm actually thinking I should read some more fiction books, because I always read
it's
books
great
about knowledge and learning and
that stuff
true
is great
stories
too,
and stuff, but
it is
there's
fun
something about fiction's a beautiful thing as well.
Or even just storytelling, like the oral tradition of like in Native culture, how it was all based on stories that were told, and there's something really beautiful about that.
Yeah, and I think the amazing thing about audio, such as podcasts and audiobooks too. Well, first of all, they're becoming more popular this day and age because people are so busy doing lots of things, and it's just really easy to pop on a podcast or an audiobook in your car rather than actually sit down and read a book. So that's really that great aspect. I mean, for me, I listen to podcasts when I'm at the gym or cooking or whatever, so it kind of frees up my other senses.
Well, I also wonder too if there's some screen fatigue, because there are so many opportunities for us to be looking at a screen in the run of a day. And I think it's tiring. It's tiring. And we still, it's not that you want to like block yourself off from everything and be in complete, isolation and cut off from everything. I mean, some people might need that to have a little break from everything, but you can have a break just by having a different experience. And it's a very different experience to watch something than to just listen to it. Like, I actually find for me, if I'm watching a music video, it's really hard not to watch when there's a screen in front of you. Like, we're very visual, so it's very hard not to look at a screen. But I actually get more out of music if I'm not watching it while I'm listening to it.
No, I can totally relate to that, because you're just focused on that one sense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I find I go deeper into the music.
Yeah, and screen fatigue is a real thing too, because movies, I mean, we just talked about how they're full of every art form. That's very stimulating. So, and then if you're watching too much of them, then your brain's not going to be used to creating its own images and ideas, and it's going to be harder for you to do that.
Traditionally movies were something that maybe people would go to. I don't even know that, they wouldn't even have been going once a week. They would have been going maybe once a month in the really early years, and then to go to the cinema, it's not something you're going to do like 7 nights a week. But the thing is, we have computers and people have cell phones. You've got a screen at your disposal all the time. So that's what I'm talking about. I think there's something different about, because when you go to a theater, there's a social element of that involved in that as well. Often you're going with someone. You might be going with a partner or a friend or a family member, right? So while the movie's happening, it's maybe not necessarily social, because you shouldn't be talking while the movie's playing, but you're talking on the way in and you're talking on the way out. So there's a social aspect to it. You're going out, but when you're in your home, there are a lot more people watching things on screen in isolation, watching a lot of it. I think it's that can start to be a little bit problematic, because we can start to get too dependent on it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think there's a balance and integration of how much time we spend on everything. It can be really easy to overindulge in these different experiences, whether it's movies, film, or food. It's kind of but I think honestly, this is a whole other subject, but it goes along with being okay with the journey, because if you're okay with how things are, then you're not going to feel the need to rush in all these pleasurable, overstimulating experiences. It's just really stimulating the dopamine in our brain, which is a very short-term thing.
Yeah, and there's something about a screen that's very it's hard not to look at it when it's there.
Exactly. It's like you spend 2 seconds scrolling on Facebook, all of a sudden it's 30 seconds, and all of a second it's 10 minutes. And in reality, it's just because it's so stimulating.
Well, I don't own a television set. That was a conscious decision I made a number of years ago. But I've noticed if I'm somewhere where there's a television, it's so hard for me not to look at it. It keeps pulling my attention towards it. It's like it's very hard not to.
It's all there, and that's why this stuff. It's always going to exist, and it's going to evolve too, right? So look out for virtual reality movies coming soon to a theater near you, which would probably be awesome. But I think as that evolves, we're also going to discover better ways of using them, and proper ways of using these amazing forms of entertainment. So, for me, I think they can really be used to impact society in a positive way.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful experience to go out and see a good film in a theater. I think that's lovely. Whether you go, sometimes I go alone. That was something I was never able to do years ago, but it was something I challenged myself with one year, try to go to a movie by yourself. And I actually now, I'm fine with it, but I also love going with people. I love going with one person. I love going with a group. I love the social aspect of it. I love the theater experience. I just think there's something so magical about that.
Just think of how many first dates have happened in a movie theater.
Yeah.
or Netflix and chill.
Yeah.
How many babies have been made from Netflix? What's the number now?
If you go there on a first date, you're probably not seeing very much of the film.
Yeah, exactly. But no, with movies in general, though, it's kind of funny how they really do bring people together, and it's you can kind of connect with people. It's almost like you're sharing an experience, and that's a way of connecting with somebody.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily have to talk, and some people go to movies as a date, and they're like, oh well, I don't really feel like that's the best way of going on a date because we're not talking, but
you talk going in and you talk going out, and you can hold hands, and you can share popcorn, and I think there's something nice. I am, I guess, a purist in the sense that I do like the traditional way of experiencing film. And like I said, I will watch films at home on my computer, but it's only because I can't go see those films in a theater, because if I had the choice, I would. And it's not to say that it's bad to watch them on your computer. It's just, I think, don't try to get out if you can to see some in the theater, because I just think it's such a beautiful experience.
Agreed. And regardless of the price, I think everybody can agree that it is a better experience.
And it's special. That's the other thing. It's not something you do all the time, so it's special. And I think that's how it was, for many, many, many years. It wasn't something that you did all the time. So when you did it, it felt like a special occasion.
Yeah, because it should be a special occasion.
I think so. I think it just makes life interesting when we can't have everything all the time. It makes it a little bit more dear.
It's almost like, I mean, if we had a fire in our backyard every day, I think it would kind of start to lose its novelty and its attraction as much, and it would just become like a chore.
There's something about having to wait for something, having to anticipate something, having to look and getting to look forward to it. It's sweet, and not having it all the time, because I think it does can dim it a little bit. It can dim the experience if you're having it all the time.
Yeah. Having breaks and stuff. So you have a few films under your belt now.
Mm-hmm.
Petal and Moth is going to be premiering very soon.
I'm going to start looking at dates for the premiere soon. I have to admit, that was such a huge project, and right when I came out of it, I was exhausted, and I jumped into doing the Tent City doc, and I leveled myself. It was too much, and then I've been sort of regrouping, because to plan a premiere the way I like to do it, it's a bit of work. It's a bit of a production. So I'm just trying to fill my cup a little bit more before I do that, but I'm getting close to that point.
It'll be well worth it. And Tent City turned out to be a really good hit, because it's actually funny. I will admit I haven't even watched it yet. But I've been waiting for the
Jordan, that's your homework.
I've been waiting for the right moment. I need a theater for this.
Oh, well, you can come on the 25th of September to Shediac, because we're part of a film festival there, and we're going to have a little Q&A after the film.
You know what? Maybe I'll wait till September 25th to watch it.
September 25th.
No, I actually wanted to have a good time to watch it, a good moment to watch it. But yeah, I'm looking for Petal and Moth, because I was an extra, and I know
that was the night that we met. You were a last-minute addition. Jordan Jardine grabbed you on the way.
Lots of amazing connections were made from that film.
Yeah, I'm very proud of that film. I'm excited to share it.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. So as far as that, like once that's all said and done, future, do you see yourself creating a new movie?
I have no idea. Because like I said, I think it's going to the next project will decide.
It'll decide for
you. It will decide for me, because I've been doing the chasing thing, and everything's just running away. So I have to take a step back.
That's amazing.
There's a beautiful. This was in a movie. I can't remember what movie it was, but there's a woman, and she's trying to teach someone a lesson, and she's telling them this story about how when she was a little girl, she loved ladybugs, and she would go looking for ladybugs, and she would look and look and look, and she'd get so frustrated because she couldn't find them, and she would look so hard that she would get tired, and then she would have to, lie down in the grass and have a little nap, and when she would wake up, they'd be crawling all over her. So that's how I feel like I need to stop looking for the ladybugs, and then hopefully I'll wake up one day and they'll be crawling all over me, and I'll have a new creative project to dive into, because I'm super goal oriented, and I'm happiest when I'm like crazy absorbed in a project.
Totally. I love that story. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. It's beautiful. So I think we'll end on that note, because we started off with the how the movies just come to you, but first, before we go, I want to ask you, what are 3 things that you would do in your life to assure that you live the most happy and fulfilling life? What would Colleen do? Yeah,
so I guess the first thing that comes to mind is that the most important thing in my life is the connections that I have to the people in my life that are dear to me. And it's very important to me that I spend time in the real world with them without, technology getting in the way. So first and foremost, I'm just a big advocate for spending time with people where there's not technological interference. So, actually going out and having a meal where you're just chatting, or you're getting together and you're not looking at things on YouTube, and again, I'm not trying to knock that. It's just, for me, what I found is to really keep things grounded and rooted and have it kind of grow in a way that's meaningful to me, I need to have the full attention with the people that I'm with. So that's first and foremost, is to nurture those relationships in the real world, in real time. And secondly, it would be my connection to nature, which is very, very strong, keeps me grounded, keeps me connected to myself, keeps me sane. I just have to be in the outside world as much as possible. And when I'm going through a difficult time, it's like my medication. That's what saves me, walking. Which I guess leads me to my third thing, which is walking. So that's like my meditation. That's my sanity. It's very important for me to be active. So it's a physical thing. It's about physical health, but it's probably even more about my psychological health, the connection to nature, the walking, and the way that I nurture my friendships. So it's funny because creativity is really important to me, but it's not the most important thing. Relationships are most important.
Well, if you didn't walk, you wouldn't have these amazing movie ideas come to you.
It's true. Actually, because Petal and Moth also came to me when I was walking.
There you go.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. So.
All right. Well, looking forward to the future of what you will create, and I'm happy to be a part of your film. Looking forward to seeing it. So
come and see the film when it shows, because you'll get to see Jordan on screen.
Yeah, totally.
He was clever. You're standing close to me, so you're in quite a few shots.
Yeah, exactly. I think I made
in that scene.
I totally made such a big impact in that movie as an extra. But anyways, well, thanks for being the first guest on my show. This is monumental. So
good luck.
Appreciate
with
it.
The
You're
podcast.
a great friend. You're a beautiful soul. I'm happy to have you on here, and I think we had some good conversations. So that's a wrap.
I look forward to seeing where this goes for you, Jordan.
Absolutely.
Congratulations.
Thank you.